Hey everybody, War Hamster Brady here with another episode of the Re-Federalist Report as we continue our journey through James Madison's notes from the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. We are up to episode 30. Not even quite halfway there, people, but we're getting there. Joining me as always, my very good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V Gibbs.
Oh, thanks for having me. Not even halfway. People don't realize how much went into this convention, and this is a great ride. It's a great opportunity for us to learn about why they made the decisions they did. And I say this often. I want to say it one more time, probably many times in the future. The founding fathers weren't just a bunch of guys who agreed on something and this wonderful thing came out of it. There was a lot of debate, a lot of discussion, a lot of disagreement. There were your bad guys, good guys, in between, changes of mind. All of that went into this, and going through Madison's notes is a great way to experience that process of forging this nation.
Yeah, and you had three big factions. Ones that just wanted to see if they could tweak around the edges of the Articles of Confederation because they were just fine. You had those that realized that they were going to fail and we probably needed something new, and they wanted to have a limited constitution, which is that's what we ratified. It's not what we got, and they were the ones. And then there was a third camp that wanted to get this huge nationalist government from day one, and go as far as having an elected king, Hamilton. Before we jump in today, I wanted to do a little quick.
But they did agree on one thing. Let me say this: they did agree on one thing: democracy fails.
Yes, they did.
That was the one thing they all agreed on. Although some of them did push to get more democratic, but they all agreed that pure democracy fails.
Well, that's not yet. That's not necessarily true because some of these nationalist proposals, Doug, wanted everything to be apportionment to be population based. That would have been a pure democracy. They were going to wipe out states' rights altogether. It wouldn't have looked anything like a republic, and that's what some of those proposals were out there. So.
Well, pure democracy would even eliminate the representative system, too. And so they at least wanted a representative system. But anyway.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Okay, well, that's different stages of democracy, all of which fail. I think they recognize that. So real quick, we're going to start with something different. If you notice anything different in my background, there's a new painting over my shoulder.
Yeah, I've got, it looks like a couple of ships there.
Really important one. So yesterday was my birthday, and I had a wonderful day.
Yesterday was your birthday. Well, happy birthday. Thank you. So you finally got to 40. All right, very good.
No, I'm still 39. I've been holding. I'm not thinking right over. So that picture was given to me by my my in-laws, and they are, as you know, they're real deep into history, and they're antique collectors, everything, and art collectors of constitutional stuff. And they knew how much I've been studying on the naval history of the war. So I'm just going to read a quick brief on what that is. That is the U.S. Bonhomme Richard, built in 1765.
I'm familiar
Bonhomme
with the
Richard.
ship. Go ahead.
What's that?
I'm familiar with the ship, but go ahead.
I'm sure you are. It was a 42-gun frigate of the Continental Navy, named for founding father Benjamin Franklin. Remember Poor Richard's Almanac? Mm-hmm. That's what Bonhomme Richard means. She was originally the East Indian Duc de Duras, which was built in France for the French Indies Company in 1765. The ship was purchased by French authorities and placed at the disposal of American Captain John Paul Jones, one of the greats, on February 4th, 1779.
Some might even say the father of the American Navy.
Some do say that, yes. By King
Louis.
I
say some might because when I say it that he was, I'm like, well, I get a few of those. So anyway, all right, go ahead.
By Louis XVI as a result of a loan to the United States by French shipping magnate Jacques Donatien Leray. Pretty good French accent, huh? Bonhomme Richard was originally an East India man named Duc de Duras, a merchant ship built at Lorient according to a plan drawn up by shipwright Antoine Groignard for the French Indies Company. In 1765, her design allowed her to be quickly transformed into a man of war in case of necessity to support the Navy. She made 2 voyages to China the first in 1766, the second in 1769. I'm sure there was no opium involved. At her return, the French Indies Company had been dissolved, and all of its installations and shipyards transferred to the French Navy. As a naval ship, she made a voyage to the Isle de France, which is Mauritius, before being sold to private ship owners in 1771. She sailed in private service until she was purchased by King Louis XVI in 1779 and placed under the command of John Paul Jones. The size and armament of Duc de Ross made her roughly equivalent to half of a 64-gun ship of the line. Jones would rename her the Bonhomme Richard for Poor Richard's Almanac. Okay, the first patrols. On June 1779, the Poor Richard's, I'm going to just say Poor Richard from now on, if I may, sailed to I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of Bonhomme because I never took French. So,
right.
Since our favorite French person, Angelique, is probably watching, she can correct me later.
Angelique. You couldn't even say her name right. But anyway, go ahead.
Sailed from Lorient, accompanied by USS Alliance, Pallas, Vengeance, and Surf, so 5 ships, with troop transports and merchant vessels under convoy to Bordeaux and to cruise against the British in the Bay of Biscay. Forced to return to port to repair, the squadron sailed again August 1779. It went northwest, around the west coast of the British Isles, into the North Sea, and then down the east coast. The squadron took 16 merchant vessels as prizes. Pretty impressive. And that's some rough sea out there in the North Sea. That's some of the toughest ocean in the world. In September 1779, the squadron encountered the Baltic fleet of 41 sail under convoy of HMS Serapis and HM hired armed ship Countess of Scarborough, near Flamborough Head. Bonhomme Richard and Serapis entered a bitter engagement at around 6 p.m. The battle continued for the next 4 hours into the night, costing the lives of nearly half of the American and British crews. The more heavily armed Serapis used its firepower to rake Bonhomme Richard with devastating effect. The commander of Serapis, Captain Richard Pearson, finally called on Jones to surrender. Jones allegedly said, "Sir, I have not yet begun to fight." Should I let you say it?
Well, I just put my finger up because it's like I can imagine that's what he did. Sir, I have. But anyway, go ahead now.
It's one of those things.
I saw it coming, man. This is like his most famous quote of all time. But anyway, sir, go ahead.
So Jones eventually managed to lash the ships together, nullifying his opponent's greater maneuverability.
And lashing ships together, by the way, was an old British tactic that goes all the way back to long before America was ever discovered. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a grappling hook, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Those crossing from one ship to another, those are some brave sons of SOBs.
Yeah.
Because you're going right into the firepower.
Right.
Allowing him to take advantage of blah, blah, blah. An attempt by the Americans to board Serapis was repulsed, as was an attempt by the British to board Bonhomme Richard. Finally, after another of Jones' ships joined the fight, Pearson was forced to surrender at about 10:30 p.m. So this is all happening at night. Bonhomme Richard, shattered, on fire, and leaking badly, defied all efforts to save her and sank about 36 hours later. Jones sailed the captured Serapis to the Dutch United Provinces for repairs. But it's a very important story in naval lore, and I've got it hanging over my shoulder from now on. So that's a pretty neat gift.
All right. So first of all, now for your education, the pronunciation is Bonhomme Richard.
Thank you.
And second, there has been a second Bonhomme Richard, LHD 6. It was commissioned back in 1998. Amphib Navy. I was on an LST back in the 80s, and so Amphib Navy has always been kind of an interest of mine, and I've kind of paid attention over time. So when a ship named Bonhomme Richard and is part of the Gator Navy is commissioned, I'm going to know about it. And so it was it was out of San Diego, and if I remember properly, it went to the Middle East once or twice. But then a couple years after it was commissioned in '98, I don't remember the exact date. So I know it was commissioned in '98, and in no, it wasn't a couple years. It was like 20 years. In 2020, so 22 years, it was undergoing maintenance in San Diego, and a fire caught, and it caused so much damage they had to decommission the ship. So it was 22 years that it was around. But 1998 to 2020. The 2020 part's easy to remember because there was something going on that year that everybody seems to remember. But so Bonham Richard, USS Bonham Richard, LHD 6. So there's been two of them.
And on that note,
both of them saw war, or at least battle, conflict.
On that note, I went with my mother-in-law to visit the Governor John Langdon House on Sunday or Saturday, and then next Sunday we're going down to visit the USS Constitution. We're going to see the Paul Revere House. A couple other things we'll stop by down in that part of Boston, and then we're going to end up at the original location of the Cheers bar, which I've just found out was all filmed in Los Angeles except for the outside, the exterior, so it may not look like
Of course.
But someone told me that yesterday.
My biggest regret is I've been to Boston once, and due to time constraints and heavy traffic that particular day, we drove through, look at that, and they kept on going. So I never got a chance to really spend time in Boston. I've seen the Constitution, but I have not seen it. And so one of these days, we definitely want to get back out there for that. That's the plan within the next few years anyway. So
make it next year, because that's probably my last summer here.
Okay.
But make it next year. We'll do it. Yeah, I agree with that. I refuse to take the tourist trips because you just get the quick version of it. I like to immerse myself and read everything in these historic sites. I cannot do the tour version. But
well, and it's like when I was at what was it, Monticello, and I'm reading every little. And my wife, she understands this about me. People are passing me, whatever, because I'm the same way. I want to read everything. The problem with me is then I read it and go, well, they were wrong there.
Well, that's the other thing is you don't want Doug and I correcting the tour guides.
I actually did that at Monticello, and she appreciated it. And I had one of my students a few years before said she had done it, got kicked off the tour. But anyway.
All right, let's jump into the Madison's notes.
Yes, sir.
But fun prelude today.
Yeah, that was fun.
All right.
And must I say, one of these days, if ever we get you out to the Oregon coast, you get to see my collection of artwork of old ships. I also have I don't know, probably a dozen paintings of large and small of various older ships, and a couple of them from the Revolutionary War. So I too love naval art. But anyway, all right, go ahead.
Yeah, just people are going to ask which picture was replaced, because my picture's back there. The lighting's not good in here. That was one of the pictures of me diving with an electric ray. So now that's all over there. But I had to move my scuba diving pictures for the ship.
it was worth. I'm sure in your mind it was a worthy move.
Oh yeah. Well, I had to put this one. That had to be front and center, right?
Had to be over your shoulder.
Yep. All right, so we last left off. We're on July 5th. They took a couple days off before that, July 3rd and 4th, not just to celebrate Independence Day, but also they'd been going back and forth on apportionment and how the Congress should be made up, one house or two, equal, population based, or one per state. That's been going on for the entire 5 weeks we've been at this. So they decided to form a committee, let the committee get together and come back with a recommendation. And the resolution they proposed was basically they wanted these are two resolutions and they have to stand together. You can't have one without the other. That's our recommendation. And of course, people are going to object to that. The first one is,
and they've had a couple of days to think about it.
Yeah. That in the first branch of the legislature, each of the states now in the union shall be allowed one member for every 40,000 inhabitants. The second resolution, where does it start? Basically, the second branch, I'm sorry, that each state cannot containing that number be allowed one member, and that all bills for raising, appropriating money, and for fixing the states of the office of the government of the United States shall originate in the first branch of the legislature. That is something they got from the British Constitution. The House of Commons always initiates bills, and shall not be altered or amended by the second branch, and that no money shall be drawn from the public. A lot of that stuff got in. And then the second part of this resolution is that the second branch of each state shall have an equal vote, which would be how the Senate turned out to be 2 votes per state.
Right. Now they were still debating over should it be 1 or 2 or whatever. Ultimately, they would go to 2 because they determined that the state legislatures would be appointing them, and that would be 1 for each chamber in the states. Go ahead.
So that's what's on the table. We get finished with Mr. Bedford making a pretty good speech about supporting something pretty close to what we needed to have. And he finished by saying, the condition of the United States requires that something should be immediately done. It will be better that a defective plan should be adopted than that none should be recommended. Gotta fix it. He saw no reason why defects might not be supplied by meetings 10, 15, or 20 years hence. And my final comment was that's why I've always suggested they should have required an Article 5 convention every 10 years. Conventions are good. Bad ideas get tossed out. Only good ideas that satisfy most people's needs get put forward. All right, we're jumping in. Mr. Ellsworth is going to respond. He said that he had not attended the proceedings of the committee, but was ready to accede to the compromise they had reported. Some compromise was necessary, and he saw none more convenient or reasonable.
In other words, we'll take this for now, but
that was the whole thing. Everyone says the Constitution is a living, breathing document, and it is. But you just can't snap your fingers and do it because you won 50% plus 1 of the election. You need to go through the amendment process, which takes 2/3 to propose and 3/4 of the states to ratify, and that's a very high burden. So,
unfortunately, the people who say it's a living and breathing document, this is why I have such a problem with it, is because it changes naturally as it ages, as a living and breathing organism does. And I'm like, no, it doesn't naturally change. It's a contract.
Yeah, there's a specific process to make the changes.
And the word process is one I use often. Processes are so important.
Yeah, I probably stole that from you. And it just shows, that there were bad actors from day one, because the very first Senate bill, Senate Judiciary Act of 1789, completely ignored Article 3 and gave the federal courts a negative on states' rights, which they've been talking about for 5 weeks that's not going to happen. So those are the issues we're dealing with. Hugh Williamson, North Carolina, hoped, that the expressions of individuals would not be taken for the sense of their colleagues, much less of the states, which was not and could not be known. He hoped also, what he's talking about is there's been people making some threats last episode. He hoped also that the meaning of these expressions would not be misconstrued or exaggerated. He did not conceive that Mr. Gouverneur Morris meant that the sword ought to be drawn against the smaller states. He only pointed out the probable consequences of anarchy in the U.S. A similar exposition ought to be given of the expressions of Mr. Gorham, who was ready to hear the report discussed, but thought the propositions contained in it the most objectionable he had yet heard. So he's trying to play peacemaker and lower the temperature in the room.
And remember, because remember, Bedford was more Jeffersonian minded, or Madisonian, I guess you could say here, since Jefferson wasn't there. Ellsworth, not so much. And we're really beginning to see at this juncture these different ideas, these different positions begin to take form, because in the beginning, they were all basically nationalists. In the beginning, they all basically believed there should be a bigger government. But as time has passed, we're starting to see, for lack of a better way of saying it, the weeds and the sheath, I guess, I can't remember the exact biblical term, being separated. You're starting to see those that are really the true nationalists and those are going, whoa, wait a second, that's a little too much. You're starting to see that bubble to the surface now. And it's creating tension, to say the least. Anyway, all right, go ahead.
And quite often, what they've said quite often, well, something has to be done. We have to make a change to the Articles of Confederation. They're not working. And one of the arguments they keep making this whole time is, well, that may be a good idea, but the states are never going to ratify that, so just knock it off.
Right.
Yeah, the people are not trusting this conference.
Right.
All right, Mr. Patterson goes next. Mr. Patterson, of course, is from New Jersey. Said that said that he had, when the report was agreed to in a committee, reserved to himself the right of freely discussing it. He acknowledged that the warmth complained of was improper, but he thought the sword and the gallows as little calculated to produce conviction. He complained of the manner in which Mr. M and Mr. Governor Morris had treated the small states. So you guys are trying to bully us. Mr. Gary from Massachusetts, though he had assented to the report in the committee, he had very material objections to it. We were, however, in a peculiar situation. This is important. We were neither the same nation nor different nations. We ought not, therefore, to pursue the one or the other of these ideas too closely. If no compromise should take place, what will be the consequence? A secession, he foresaw, would take place. For some gentlemen seemed decided on it. Two different plans will be proposed, and the result no man could foresee. If we do not come to some agreement among ourselves, some foreign sword will probably do the work for us.
And while I'm not a big fan of Elbridge Gary, a lot of the time, that nailed it.
Yeah, he's correct. And that's exactly the debate I'm having on Twitter right now with a good friend. Basically, he would have been even more of an anti-federalist than me. And we've been going back at it back and forth for a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll agree to disagree at the end and remain friends. Mr. Mason, George Mason, this is one of my heroes. And I think I told you last week that we did the experiment on Grok. Grok, based on my posts on Twitter history, which historical figure do I most resemble? And George Mason.
So what you're saying is, in parentheses, after Mr. Mason put the original war hamster?
Yeah, something like that. But this is interesting insight into Mason, because some people paint him as was as anti-federalist as they come. Well, let's see. The report was meant not as specific propositions to be adopted, but merely as a general ground of accommodation.
In other words, wait, guys, we're working on this. We're trying to compromise. Don't be deciding that this is it. Go ahead.
It's a framework. There must be some accommodation on this point, or we shall make little further progress in the work. They're stalled. Accommodation was the object of the House in the appointment of the committee. That's why we took 2 days off. And of the committee and the report they had made. And however liable the report might be to objections, he thought it preferable to an appeal to the world by the different sides, as had been talked of by some gentlemen. It could not be more inconvenient to any gentleman to remain absent from his private affairs than it was for him, when he would bury his bones in this city, rather than expose his country to the consequences of a dissolution of the convention without anything being done. So one of the biggest objectors to the strength of the Constitution says we can't stay the way we are. So going back to the first proposition in the report for fixing the representation to one member for every 40,000 inhabitants. We're going to debate that now. Mr. Governor Morris objected to that scale of apportionment. This is really important here. He thought property ought to be taken into the estimate as well as the number of inhabitants. Life and liberty were generally said to be of more value than property. An accurate view of the matter would nevertheless prove that property was the main object of society. A savage state was more favorable to liberty than a civilized, and so sufficiently so to life. So what he's saying there is anarchy is when you have the most liberty, but you also have no property. When you're going to have a society, you've got to respect property, and it's just as important as life and liberty. And he's going to make the argument that property should factor in to the apportionment of representation in government. And of course, he is from a wealthy state in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I was getting ready to say, wealth and power is what he's basically saying. Wealth and power should be a part of it too. Well, then you might as well set up a House of Lords.
Yeah, and this is not unprecedented. Again, where I'm sitting here in New Hampshire, their original state constitution and their bicameral state senate. And remember, most of these states, those 13, already had bicameral legislatures. So the idea was not unique here. But New Hampshire apportioned their state senators by tax revenue. And that's different than anyone else had done. So this is not a unique thought. It was preferred by all men who had not acquired a taste of property. It was only renounced for the sake of property, which could only be secured by the restraints of regular government. These ideas might appear to some
stop
new.
there for a second. Did you notice what he said there? It was only renounced for the sake of property, which could only be secured by the restraints of regular government. If you don't have a government that restrains itself, property rights are the first to suffer.
And understood, but you have to have a government to secure those rights. Otherwise, the anarchists, it'll be, might makes right.
Right. Well, it gets back to the comment that we've made a few times. This was more of a Madisonian point of view, although historically it goes way back. Is government is a necessary evil. Without it, you have no freedom. Too much of it, you have no freedom. And so you got to find that balance, word I like to use a lot. And I think that's kind of what this statement was. Not that Gouverneur Morris is a fascinating guy. He was brilliant when it came to the preamble. He's kind of wishy-washy on other items, but in the long run, he leaned more in a Hamiltonian, viewpoint than most of them. And so he's fascinating because he recognizes the importance of government, but sometimes in his statements, you got to be careful with him. He may give it a little more emphasis and importance than maybe is necessary.
Yeah, but he uses the word restraint, so that's why I say this is one of his better speeches he will give.
Oh, he's on target here, and that's the reason why I brought this up. He's on target, and he's recognizing that you need government for property rights, but it has to be restrained, because if you goes back to what I was saying earlier, too much government or not enough, and you have no freedom either way. Too much government or not enough government, you have no property rights either way. And that's essentially what he's saying. But who restrains the government? And often you'll see these statements, a government that restrains itself, which is a good statement, but governments don't typically restrain themselves. So there has to be other factors involved to make sure that restraint is held.
Yeah, if the restraints aren't strong enough, they'll incrementally take more and more power. That is the nature of government. You end up in a situation today where the government basically owns 56% of your wages for your entire life. That's not what the founders would. In fact, they would have been up in arms a long time ago.
And quite a bit of property west of the Mississippi, too, by the way. But anyway, all right.
Federal land grab. These ideas might appear to some new, but they were nevertheless just. If property then was the main object of government, certainly it ought to be one measure of the influence due to those who were to be affected by the government. This is the argument for you have to have stake in the game to vote. And there's some merit to that, Doug.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you don't have stake in the game, then how's a politician going to convince you to vote for them?
By giving you things.
Yeah, by giving you things. And so when you have stake in the game, you need to be a property owner or something like that. And of course, the opposition of the Constitution say, well, that's just to keep the poor people from voting. Well, yeah, but not in the way that you're presenting it. That, yes, as Winston Churchill said, the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. If your aim for how you vote is what can government give to me, I don't want you voting, and neither did they.
And if the government is going to give you something, that means they have to take it from someone else, and that means they're taking my property. And that's the fundamental issue here. Yeah, this is the whole thing.
And today we call that what? Redistribution of wealth. Well, they had a term for it as well. Redistribution of wealth existed. They understood the concept. Samuel Adams called it the schemes of leveling.
Love that terminology. And this is what I've been arguing for ages about natural law. The government, the only moral purpose of a government is to preserve your God-given rights of life, liberty, and property, maintain order, and handle international affairs. Anything else they do, you start going down the slippery slope, which is why when someone like Hamilton argues for federally funded internal improvements and protective tariffs will always benefit one region from another. So you're taking from one to give to another. Taxpayer handouts, federally funded internal improvements, you're going to get general contractors, but it's for the greater good. Where does that slippery slope end? And we know where it ends, and it ends in tyranny. Whether you want to call it fascism, you can call it socialism, you can call it communism, all of them, that's where the slippery slope ends. It's where the government has all the power and you have no rights. And that's why the slippery slope should never have been allowed. And Governor Morris is making a good argument for that.
Right.
He looked forward also to that range of new states, which would soon be formed in the West. This gets interesting. He thought the rule of representation ought to be so fixed as to secure to the Atlantic states a prevalence in the national councils. Prevalence. Isn't this just kind of how things turned out? The Atlantic states decided they were going to dominate everyone. Sort of ended in a bloody civil war. All right. The new states will know less of the public interest than these. Will have an interest in many respects different. In particular, will be little scrupulous of involving the community in wars, the burdens and operations of which would fall chiefly on the maritime states. What's he saying there, Doug?
I was writing a note at the same time. Read it one more time.
Well, basically saying these new states aren't going to really be as interested in, they're going to have less public interest. They're not going to be as knowledgeable.
Well, and remember, we're talking about at this juncture in history, we're talking about the Northwest Territory, or what became known as Northwest Territory.
Basically the Midwest.
Yeah, the Ohio and Indiana and Michigan and all these this region that hasn't been formed yet in Illinois and so on. It's not been completely formed, not been totally. I mean, they've at this point they have separated them into territories. They know they're going to become states. It's beginning to become populated, but and they know they're on their way. But at the same time, they're going to have less population. There's no industry out there, so they're also viewing them as coming in as poor states. So they're not going to have the same opportunities as the existing states because of their status as a new state and their status because they don't have the population and so on and so forth. And that's really what this discussion is about. And they, because they're new, because they are in the frontier, also their way of looking at things, their interests, their desires are going to be completely different. And this is what he's pointing out here. Understand, we're not just a single entity of a bunch of states that are the same, even though there's a lot of similarities between the North Atlantic states. There's, we're going to be experiencing more so than we already do these different regions that are like different countries, their own way of looking at things, their own cultures, their own industries, and so on and so forth, their own needs, their own desires, their own relationship with this government.
Their own different economies as well, because we already have an agrarian South. We've got a mercantilist Atlantic seaboard, and these new Midwest states are going to be a little bit of a combination of the two.
Well, and also they have something else that's going to be coming into play that the other states really don't have anymore, which is the fur trade and timber and things like that also.
All right, let's continue. And that matters. Every region's economic interests are going to be different, and they're going to want power. And really, that's what they're debating about: who's going to have more power in Congress to favor their region. And everyone's afraid that any region or faction gets too much power, it's going to use it to their advantage. And history shows that fear to have been correct. That's exactly what the Civil War was fought over. Provision ought therefore to be made to prevent the maritime states from being hereafter outvoted by them. He thought this might be easily done by irrevocably fixing the number of representatives which the Atlantic states should respectively have, and the number which each new state will have. This would not be unjust, as the Western settlers would previously know the conditions on which they were to possess their lands. it would be politic, as it would recommend the plan to the present as well as future interest of the states, which must decide the fate of it. So if you want to come to the Union, understand you're going to be the redheaded stepsister. That's what he's saying. As long as we get to keep our power, you can never outvote us. He's trying to protect the Atlantic interests. Obviously, this isn't going to fly. Rutledge is next, and of course, he's from South Carolina. South Carolina's got some of the more unusual delegates. Some of their propositions are way out there.
Well, and the interesting thing about South Carolina, because of their position and because of what a lot of the common folk believed, the representation was all over the place. You had your Hamiltonians, you had your Jeffersonians, you had something, I don't even know what to label them. And you would not think that about South Carolina, considering its history and considering its position in the states at the time. So they did produce some fascinating founders, to say the least. Go ahead.
Rutledge says the gentleman last up had spoken some of his sentiments precisely. He agrees with Governor Morris. Property was essential, was certainly the principal object of society.
Of course, someone from an agrarian location is going to view property rights as huge. Go ahead.
If numbers should be made the rule of representation, the Atlantic states will be subjected to the Western. He moved that the first proposition of the report be postponed in order to take up the following: that the suffrages of the several states shall be regulated and proportioned according to the sums to be paid towards the general revenue by the inhabitants of each state respectively. That's what New Hampshire had in for their Senate. That an apportionment of suffrages according to the ratio aforesaid shall be made and regulated at the end of blank years from the first meeting of the legislature of the U.S. and at the end of every blank years. But for the present, and until the period mentioned above, the suffrages shall be for New Hampshire, Massachusetts. And there's a footnote here that's interesting. I'm going to go to. Oh, no, that's not the one I wanted. All right. So basically, he is making a proposition. Let's vote on what Governor Morris just proposed and have it be proportionment include tax revenue. Colonel Mason's going to respond to that. And he said the case of new states was not unnoticed in the committee, but it was thought, and he was himself decidedly of opinion, that if they made part of the Union, they ought to be subject to no unfavorable discriminations. Obvious considerations required it. So no double secret probation for new states. If you're in the Union, you're in the Union. So this gets, Mr. Randolph concurs with Mason, and this gets Rutledge's motion goes to the floor, and you're just going to see no.
I want you to, real quick, Randolph concurred with Colonel Mason. Understand, that's not something that happens often. All right, go ahead.
All right, so basically this vote goes 10-1, 10 no's to 1 aye for South Carolina, which means Governor Morris's own state, Pennsylvania, did not even say yes to it. So we got that question. That one shot down.
That got shot down. That was my thinking. The exact same words. Boy, that got shot down quick.
Maybe it's 9-1. Someone else was on the floor. Okay, that was the end of the day. We're adjourned, and we're going to go to the following day. It's Friday, July 6th. Ooh, next week's Friday the 13th. Wonder what's going to happen then. Mr. Governor Morris, who just got shot down, moved to commit so much of the report as relates to one member for every 40,000 inhabitants. His view was they might absolutely fix the number for each state in the first instance, leaving the legislature at liberty to provide for changes in the relative importance of the states and for the case of new states. So he's not giving up. Now, this 40,000 number, it matters because you want to talk about the one of the original 12 bills in the Bill of Rights that has never been passed.
Yeah, that's the one per 30,000. And so what we know from that member of the Bill of Rights that never got ratified is they didn't get it in the committee, so they decided to try to, during convention, so they tried to get it later through an amendment, and the states rejected it. And one of the reasons is because the states didn't trust a large bureaucracy. They wanted to keep it as limited as possible. But what he's referring to is 12 amendments were sent out to the states for the Bill of Rights. 10 were ratified to become the Bill of Rights. First Amendment with your 5 enumerated, speech and religion and press and assembly and petition. Your Second Amendment with the right to keep and bear arms and so on and so forth. 2 of them did not get ratified at that time. One of them eventually did in 1992. It became the 27th Amendment. But you got this one hanging out there. Now, understand something. When these amendments were proposed, there was no limit put on them. There was no expiration date. So that that amendment can, unless something is passed to kill its existence, can hang there forever.
Well, and it's an important concept, because one thing we all agree upon is you need to have, we want local representation. Now, 40,000, if I'm one representative for 40,000, the odds are pretty good my constituents can get my ear from time to time. That's not terrible. That's like a small town. But right now, we've got every Congress critter represents 800,000 people, which means you do not have any local representation. They represent a national political party, which controls.
In the 1900s, they set the numbers so that it was based more on percentages than actual numbers. The numbers early on were basically one for every 30,000, 40,000, but it was that what wound up in the Constitution is that one representative could not represent, or let me rephrase that. A region of people of 30,000 could not be represented by more than one person. That's what they wound up putting in the Constitution. But they didn't necessarily say how many representatives per. It's just that was kind of the minimum limit.
And this is something that really does need to be addressed, because if you say, let's say we stuck to 30,000, we passed that amendment, well, you're going to have something like 12,000 or 11,400 members of Congress, and that's about 11,000 too many. So that doesn't work. But what we have currently doesn't work because you don't have any local representation. So what has to happen is a compromise between the two. And what I've long proposed, and I'm going to keep barking up this tree, is you need some sort of a electoral college where your 11,300 local representatives get together and they appoint their 435 people to sit in DC, or you can do some kind of rotation. But having 11,000 people in Congress that will never work, and what we have doesn't work. So we need to. This has to be addressed. That's why I spend some time on the topic.
Well, and one of the things that I respond when people say, "Well, they would be more in tune with their population if they're representing less people," I said, if that's true, then how is it that city councils are often worse than state and federal legislatures?
Well, I've got an answer for that. That's because the town councils get paid by outside NGOs and everything like that. They've got an agenda, like an Agenda 21 or a Soros type thing. And those are the people, that's what these people ideologically and financially are dependent upon, not their constituents. So you have a corruption problem. You don't have a representation problem.
I agree and disagree. Where I disagree is I don't think it's the NGOs as much as it is human nature. You have a power issue. You have people that once they're in there, they're in that bubble. They have their power. They do everything they can to hold on to it. It's a power problem. It's a human nature problem.
Which is yet another argument for limited government.
Yeah.
All right. Mr. Wilson seconded the motion, but with a view of leaving the committee under no implied shackles. Mr. Gorham comes back. He's been gone for a little bit. No, he's been around. I mean, he hasn't been speaking much. Again, this is Nathaniel Gorham. He's from Massachusetts. He apprehended great inconveniency from fixing directly the number of representatives to be allowed to each state. He thought the number of inhabitants the true guide, though perhaps some departure might be expedient from the full proportion. The states also would vary in their relative extent by separations of parts of the larger states. A part of Virginia is now on the point of separation. In the province of Maine, a convention is at this time deliberating on a separation from Massachusetts. Do you recall what year that happened?
No.
that it actually did separate. I think it's coming up about early 1800s. In such events, the number of representatives ought certainly to be reduced, which makes perfect sense. You have fewer people, you should have fewer reps. He hoped to see all the states made small by proper divisions instead of their becoming formidable, as was
Now,
apprehended.
were you asking? Were you asking when Maine pretty much became a territory and was not necessarily part of the state anymore, or when it became a state? Because it became a state during the Missouri Compromise in the 1830s.
But it split off from Massachusetts much earlier.
Yeah, it became like a territory. Yeah.
So here's an interesting one. He said he hoped to see all states made small by proper divisions instead of their becoming formidable, as was apprehended to the small states. Boy, I wish California could hear that. He conceived, and that's really why California won't let itself be divided, because it gets immense power in Congress.
Yeah.
He conceived that let the general government be modified as it might, there would be a constant tendency in the state governments to encroach upon it. It was of importance, therefore, that the extent of the states should be reduced as much and as fast as possible. The stronger the government shall be made in the first instance, the more easily will these divisions be effected, as it will be of less consequences in the opinion of the states, whether they be of great or small extent. That is an interesting argument, isn't
it? Excuse me. And the thing is about Gorham, first of all, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's Madison's pen or if it's the Avalon Project, but of misspelling names, like we have Sharman and Sherman. So Gorham's name is actually spelled Gorham, Gorham. That's the proper spelling. This guy was a Hamiltonian and a half. His ultimate goal, regardless of what he says, and like Hamilton, he was really good at saying a whole lot of nothing to say something, and he was for a strong nationalist. He totally aligned with Hamilton. He aligned with Madison's early push for the Virginia plan, but he was what you would call a Hamiltonian, and he also recognized he was one of the voices early on that said there's no way we can fix the Articles. We've got to have a new constitution. We must have a larger government. And once again, while technically Gorham and Hamilton were right, we did need something more centralized and stronger. Be very careful with it, because there's a line you don't want to cross. But then he wanted to cross that line, but he was trying to get what he could now.
Yeah, instead of making he is saying he wants a strong central government, but he's also saying we can accomplish that by weakening the larger states by dividing them up so they each individually has less power.
Right.
And he's saying, well, this is what the small states wanted, but it's interesting. He's talking out of two sides of his mouth there. But it's interesting what he said. Okay, let's continue. Mr. Gary, also from Massachusetts, did not think with his colleague that the large states ought to be cut up. There's a division in Massachusetts. This policy has been inculcated by the middling and smaller states ungenerously and contrary to the spirit of the Confederation. Ambitious men will be apt to solicit needless divisions till the states be reduced to the size of counties. If this policy should still actuate the small states, the large ones could not confederate safely with them, but would be obliged to consult their safety by confederating only with one another. He favored the commitment and thought that the representation ought to be in the combined ratio of numbers of inhabitants and of wealth, and not of either singly.
He's kind of got an interesting argument here, because he's saying this is dangerous, but because, see, Hamilton wanted to reduce the states to just mere provinces. What he's saying is the small states would ultimately become mere provinces, and then the big states just control everything. And I think he's right here. Elbridge Gerry, once again, he's a fascinating individual. For those of you who wonder about the name, gerrymander, Elbridge Gerry. He was governor of Massachusetts at the time that gerrymandering arose and revealed its ugly salamander-looking head.
So, for those of you who've watched a lot of our episodes, you've heard Doug tell that story about gerrymandering again, and I'm glad he repeats it at some of these points because there's new listeners that haven't gone back 20 episodes and heard him say
Right.
that. And there's some important lessons. And you know, Doug's taught so many hundreds of Constitution classes, and I've been to so many of them that I can practically tell you what's going to come out of his lips next sometimes. But he does repeat himself, but it's important because he's there's points that need to be hammered home for one thing, but there's also new listeners. So bear with us when we say stuff we just may have said a week or two before, because it doesn't mean we haven't changed our mind much. All right. Mr. King wished the clause to be committed chiefly in order to detach it from the report, with which it had no connection. He also thought that the ratio of representation proposed could not be safely fixed, since in a century and a half, our computed increase in population would carry the number of representatives to an enormous excess. Sounds familiar. And by the way, their calculations for population growth fell way short of what actually happened. That ye number of inhabitants was not the proper index of ability and wealth, that property was the primary object of society, and that in fixing a ratio, this ought not to be excluded from the estimate. With regard to new states, he observed that there was something peculiar in the business which had not been noticed. The United States were now admitted to be proprietors of the country northwest of the Ohio, Northwest Territory. Congress, by one of their ordinances, have impolitically laid it out into 10 states and have made it a fundamental article of compact with those who may become settlers, that as soon as the number in any one state shall equal that of the smallest of the 13 original states, it may claim admission to the Union. Now, that was passed under the Articles of Confederation Congress, and it's an interesting way. As soon as you become as big as Rhode Island, you can join. Interesting.
Well, on the surface, it seems reasonable, but then again, you have a lot more land out there.
Delaware does not contain, it is computed more than 35,000 souls, and for obvious reasons will not increase much for a considerable time. It is possible then that if this plan be persisted by in Congress, 10 new votes may be added without a great addition of inhabitants that are represented by the single vote of Pennsylvania. The plan as it respects one of the new states is already irrevocable. The sale of the lands having commenced, and the purchasers and settlers will immediately become entitled to all the privileges of the compact. He's worried about Pennsylvania being outvoted by the new states.
Yeah, well, it almost sounds like you can see both sides of the argument here, but it almost sounds like some of the political knuckleheads today complaining about how the Senate is not very democratic because there's 2 per. Well, do you really want to give these small areas this much power all of a sudden and then just outvote all of us? All these yahoos just went out there and, into this, and so, and once again, and understand something. I wrote this not too long ago. In the end, for a lot of the people who challenge constitutional ideas and limited government, they have one ideology: power. That's their ideology. And King is a fascinating. He wound up going from he's Massachusetts here. He winds up becoming a part of New York, and he was quite the power is important kind of minded individual. So you just understand that this is a lot of debate that's going on here. It's all about power, and it's not just about power. It's about keeping power. Big states want to keep their power. The small states don't want to be overpowered. All of them are afraid that these other states might come in and use their power to override what they've done. It's all about power, all of it.
And they're just trying to protect their economies, and the economies are different.
Absolutely.
Mr. Butler agreed to the commitment of the committee were to be left at liberty. He was persuaded that the more the subject was examined, the less it would appear that the number of inhabitants would be a proper rule of proportion. If there were no other objection, the changeableness of the standard would be sufficient. He concurred with those who thought some balance was necessary between the old and new states. He contended strenuously that property was the only just measure of representation. This was a great object of government, the great cause of war, the great means of carrying it on. This is interesting because we know that property didn't end up in a final draft of the Constitution, but it's getting some very strong proponents of making that sort of a criteria.
Well, with property comes power, to go back to what I was saying earlier. And that's part of the reason why it wasn't included the way that you might have preferred. Power was property, or vice versa. Property was power. And they understood this. And Madison explains it quite a bit, where he says, because of power, and you could insert property in there if you want, because of power, and this argument over power, and everybody fighting for power, the purpose of this document was to divide the power in such a way that power didn't matter. Distribute power in such a way power didn't matter. That who had the most property, or who had the most population, or who had the most wealth, or so on and so forth, didn't allow them to take control. Power had to be distributed. That's ultimately what happened. They're sitting here and they're literally fighting over who gets the power. Oh, well, the people who own the most property. No, the states with the most population. They're fighting over who gets the power. And what ultimately happens is the power gets distributed in such a way that nobody gets the power.
Mr. Pinckney saw no good reason for committing. The value of land had been found on full investigation to be an impracticable rule. The contributions of revenue, including imports and exports, must be too changeable in their amount, too difficult to be adjusted, and too injurious to the non-commercial states. That's a great point, Pinckney.
Yeah, South Carolina sure has a lot to say today, don't they? Yeah. Pinckney be another South Carolina guy. But anyway, all right, go ahead.
The number of inhabitants appeared to him to be the only just and practicable rule. He thought the blacks ought to stand on an equality with whites, but would agree to the ratio settled by Congress.
This is a hint towards the 3/5 clause.
He contended that Congress had no right under the Articles of Confederation to authorize the admission of new states, no such case having been provided for. Now, I'm not sure that's the case, because I'm going to jump to the Articles of Confederation real quick. And I think it's down here. Article 12 or 13, they do have something for new states. Canada, acceding to this confederation and adjoining the measures of the United States, shall be admitted to and entitled to all advantage of the Union, but no other colony shall be admitted into the same unless such admission be agreed to by 9 states. So he's incorrect, according to this reading. Am I wrong?
So now here's the question. Is he incorrect because he doesn't know? Or is he incorrect because he knows, but he's hoping nobody else does?
Yeah, it's interesting. Because that's an objection that would have been brought up in Congress and should have been shut down long ago. So I don't understand the saying Congress had no rights. It's right there in Article 11.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Davie, spelled wrong again. It's Davie, was for committing the clause in order to get at the merits of the question arising on the report. He seemed to think that wealth or property ought to be represented in the second branch and numbers in the first. All right, now we're getting somewhere. On the motion for committing to,
well, this is you understand they're working off of what they know. What do they know? House of Commons, House of Lords, but we don't want a nobility. But the House of Lords, pseudo House of Lords, has to have some type of aristocratic kind of something, and so that's the reason why they're like, okay, the House of Representatives would be the House of Commons, common voice based on population of the people, but the second branch of the legislature has to be something that's more aristocratic. And since we don't have nobility, but what is the nobility known for? Having property ownership, or at least control over property. So that's something that's kind of in there. Well, so they're, and I'm not saying that's necessarily exactly what they're saying, but they're operating from what they know. They hadn't really thought about what becomes. All they know is that the two houses need to be different, that the second house should have some type of aristocratic or property influence or something, because those are the people. Because if you own property, what does that say about you? You have skin in the game. You are more involved. You understand more. You're not just the Yahoo out there that might be voting on the street. And that's what they're trying to do. And that gets back to the pseudo aristocracy with the Senate. That's what they were searching for, because they knew it couldn't be the same, or at least a lot of them knew it couldn't be exactly the same as the democracy in the House of Representatives.
Okay, so they took a vote on Governor Morris's $40,000 proposal, and the ayes win it, like 7-3. The members appointed by ballot, I have no idea what they're appointing them to at this point, were Governor Morris, Mr. Gorham, Randolph, Rutledge, and King. James Wilson signified that his view in agreeing to the commitment was that the committee might consider the propriety of adopting a scale similar to that established by the Constitution of Massachusetts, which would give an advantage to ye small states without substantially deporting from a rule of proportion. And we probably ought to look up next week the Constitution of Massachusetts. I don't remember specifically how theirs was different. And I should have done that ahead of time, so I apologize. But I will have that ready next week. Mr. Wilson and Mason moved to postpone the clause relating to money bills in order to take up the clause relating to an equality of votes in the second branch. So, okay, we'll worry about the money, who initiates bills relating to money later.
We know we're going to do it anyway. That's kind of what we know. That's kind of the way they do it in Britain anyway. Let's just set aside. It's not important, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll be addressing how that actually became dysfunctional in Britain in 1911. I'll be doing that on Friday. There was a little bit of a legislative impasse that they solved by basically stripping the House of Lords of a lot of their power and shifting it more to the House of Commons. And this is the motion to skip over the money. So it's no, yay, aye, ayes have it. The clause relating to equality of votes being under consideration, which is basically one representative per state in the second chamber, which is the Senate.
Or two or whatever, but it just said it's equal, that no state has power based on population in that second house.
Yeah, no one's brought up two yet, but we'll get there. And which is interesting because in the Articles of Confederation, it was unicameral. There's only one body of Congress, and every state had one vote. And the Articles
but they had delegates anywhere from 7 to 14.
I think it was 2 to 7.
Was it 2 to 7? I thought it was 7-14. Well, regardless of the number, you were allowed to have more or less, but in the end, it was still one vote per state. And this is something that you see in the Constitution on other clauses where, like, for example, if the presidential election is not resolved by the Electoral College, it goes to the House, and the House then would vote in the president. But again, no matter how many members each state has, it comes down to one vote per state. So this is an idea that did make its way into the Constitution, just in different ways.
Yeah, and it could have made some pretty interesting discussions. Let's say we had 2 representatives from our state and they didn't agree. Well, how are you going to come? Were you flipping a coin to decide important matters?
Yeah.
Dr. Franklin observed that this question could not be properly put by itself, the committee having reported several propositions as mutual conditions of each other. He could not vote for it if separately taken, but should vote for the whole together, which is what the committee had said.
Yeah, and get back to what to do if there's a tie. Then the state has no vote until it can make its decision. In the case of Jefferson's presidential election, Vermont had 3 members of the House. One was voting for Aaron Burr, one was voting for Jefferson, and one of them was in jail, Lyons. And so Vermont had no vote until Lyons was let out of jail, cast his vote to Jefferson. Vermont went to Jefferson.
Very good. One of my favorite stories in history. That 1800 election, there's so much to it.
It prompted the proposal of the 12th Amendment for good reason. But anyway, go ahead.
George Mason perceived the difficulty and suggested a reference of the rest of the report to ye committee just appointed that the whole might be brought into one view. Mr. Randolph disliked reference to that committee, as it consisted of members from states opposed to the wishes of the smaller states and could not therefore be acceptable to the latter. Mr. Martin, Mr. Jennifer moved to postpone the clause till the committee last appointed should report. That's the committee we just voted on, which is made up of Morris, Gorham, Randolph, Rutledge, and King. So it's Pennsylvania. Gorham is Mass. Randolph is, we know where Randolph is from, don't we? Virginia. Yeah, so three big states. Rutledge is New Jersey. That's small states. And King is from Massachusetts.
And Rutledge was kind of outvoted here because the other four, anyway, I'm sorry, they're Hamiltonian-minded kind of, lean in that direction. Randolph, not as much, but he's more in a Madisonian camp, but he's from a large state. So, but anyway, go ahead.
All right. Mr. Jennifer moved to postpone the clause till the committee was reported. Madison observed that if the uncommitted part of the report was connected with the part just committed, it ought also to be committed. If not connected, it need not be postponed till reports should be made. On the question for postponing moved by Mr. Martin and Mr. Jennifer. This is a mess, but I'm going to say we got more ayes than noes. Okay. The first clause, how are we doing on time, Doug?
That's a good question.
We're at 1 hour and 6 minutes in. I'd like to continue. I am in no rush today, so if you want to power some out, let's keep going.
Right. Go ahead.
Totally up to you.
Go ahead.
Because this is good stuff. Remember, it's all good stuff. But
and we would like to finish what we started.
Is that doable today? Possibly.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, where am I? Mr. Governor Morris was opposed to a restriction of this right in either branch, considered merely in itself and as connected with a point of representation in the second branch. It will disable the second branch from proposing its own money plans and giving the people an opportunity of judging by comparison the merits of those proposed by the first.
And just real quick, when you asked about time, so I have a breakfast at 9, which is 45 minutes from now. And it's about a 10 to 15 minute drive down there. So I got about half an hour more if you wanted to push it to its limit.
All right. We'll wrap up we'll make it about 20 minutes to make it easy so you don't have to rush.
Okay.
James Wilson could see nothing like a concession here on the part of the smaller states. If both branches were to say yes, it was of little or no consequence which should say yes or no first, which last. It's a great point. He's saying it doesn't matter who proposes it because they both got to agree to it. It doesn't matter. So if either was indiscriminately to have the right of originating, the reverse of the report would he thought to be the most proper, since it was a maxim that at least the least numerous body was the fittest for deliberation. Because, well, if you're going to have one or the other, make it be the Senate that initiates money bills. The most
problem is now you've got the pseudo aristocracy then would be proposing the money bills. Do you really want that?
Yeah, if you get the people, if the people's houses proposing the money bills, you're more likely to get government handouts. If the Senate's doing it, you're more likely to get crony capitalism.
Right.
So that's the balance they're trying to fight here.
Talk about a rock and hard place.
How about we just limit the government, and so neither one of them has an incentive to give away money that they, that isn't constitutionally enumerated, and let the states handle that stuff. Oh, it's not such a rock and a hard place after all, is it, Doug? If we can only follow that. He observed that this discrimination had been transcribed from the British into several American constitutions. But he is persuaded that on examination of the American experiments, it would be found to be a trifle light as air. Nor could he ever discover the advantage of it in the parliamentary historian of history of Great Britain. He hoped if there was any advantage of the privilege that it would be pointed out.
Well, what I meant by rock and hard place is because you have this staunch positions here. And most often what happened in the convention is exactly what you kind of said, where you had this or that and something else was figured out. But this was not something that was as debated in that manner, that there was compromise possible.
No, you're talking, the people, what's the expression? As soon as the people figure out that they can vote themselves, the 51% can vote themselves the benefits.
Yeah.
That's what we're afraid of with the House starting it.
Right.
And crony capitalism is what we're afraid of with the Senate. And the only way to stop either of those evils from happening is to keep that power away from the government.
Well, and so and that's why it fascinates me that ultimately they didn't give it to the Senate with if the Senate's going to be the voice of the states. But again, because the Senate was a pseudo aristocracy, there was a fear that if you gave that kind of power to this pseudo aristocracy, you're going to wind up with crony capitalism, mercantilism, and all of its cousins. And so, what do you do then? And the argument ultimately was, well, if the people doesn't like what their government is doing, it's one way that the people, through their democratic vote, can stop the government from doing something that's out of control by simply starving it of money. So it was an attempt to give the money, I'm sorry, give the people a way to be able to pull the plug.
Yeah, but it's such an important topic.
Yeah.
People think this stuff just happened. No, these guys are debating this stuff for weeks on end.
Oh yeah.
Mr. Williamson thought that if the privilege were not common to both branches, it ought rather be confined to the Senate, as the bills in that case would be more narrowly watched than if they originated in the branch having most of the popular confidence.
In other words, the pseudo aristocracy, they know what they're doing more.
Well, it's
a smaller number of representation.
And they've got more money, which means they're probably paying more in taxes, which means they've got more stake in the game, and they're going to keep a closer oversight into it.
Right.
George Mason said the consideration which weighed with the committee was that the first branch would be the immediate representatives of the people, the second would not. Correct. Should the latter have the power of giving away the people's money, they might soon forget the source from whence they received it. We might soon have an aristocracy. The reason I love George Mason. He had been much concerned at the principles which had been advanced by some gentlemen, but had the satisfaction to find they did not generally prevail. He was a friend to the proposal of representation in both branches, but supposed that some points must be yielded for the sake of accommodation. That's just George Mason at his finest. Mr. Wilson, if he had proposed that the second branch should have an independent disposal of public money, the observations of Colonel Mason would have been a satisfactory answer. But nothing could be further from what he had said. His question was, how is the power of the first branch increased or that of the second diminished by giving the proposed privilege to the former? Where is the difference in which branch it begins if both must concur in the end? From a logical standpoint, Wilson is actually making a really good argument, but he's not looking deeper into how government actually works and control levers of power and everything like that. I think Mason is looking beneath the surface.
Wilson, too, because of his Scottish background, you gotta realize he immigrated from Scotland, and the Scottish didn't trust the English, and so he kind of brought this. I don't know if I trust these things quite the way I ought to, kind of personality. And so Wilson, while he did lean towards a more centralized system, he didn't lean as hard as someone like Hamilton might, but he also had his reservations on a lot of things. And so when he talks, keep that in mind.
I kind of look at this as a husband and wife with a household budget.
Mm-hmm.
You probably need to agree on major expenditures, but is there somebody who basically is in charge of the money or not? It's sort of that kind of situation.
Yeah, well, one of the ways my wife and I decided to resolve that, and this is kind of a idea that's kind of set in what we're seeing, is she wrote the checks and I balanced the checkbook.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good analogy or not. I'll have to work on that one. It popped into my head. I just don't want my wife getting any ideas. If she watches this, I'm kidding, guys.
Oh, you'll find, but see, the person balancing the checkbook, we'll find out. We'll know.
Mr. Gary would not say that the concession was a sufficient one on the part of the small states, but he could not but regard, in light of the concession, and this is really interesting because if it's going to be the first house, that means the big populous states are going to have control of the purse strings, but it's more of their money going in, so that actually makes sense. If it's the second house, then the states, which the small states, which have equal representation, will have more power over the purse strings, and that's the concession he's talking about. It would make it a constitutional principle that the second branch were not possessed of the confidence of the people in money matters, which would lessen their weight and influence. In the next place, if the second branch were dispossessed of the privilege, they would be deprived of the opportunity which their continuance in office 3 times as long as the first branch would give them of making 3 successive essays in favor of a particular point.
Well, the point being made here is, well, they don't have the wherewithal to write the checks. But then the other arguments might be, yeah, but they would have the wherewithal of what not to write.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Pinckney thought it evident that the concession was wholly on one side, that of the large states, the privilege of originating bills, money bills, to being of no account. All right, Mr. Governor Morris had waited to hear the good effects of the restriction.
Real quick with Pinckney, what he's we're basically saying, if it's left to the people, that means the big states are in control of the checkbook because it's based on population. So you really want the big states being the ones that are writing the checks.
Mr. Governor Morris had waited to hear the good effects of the restriction. As did the alarm sounded of an aristocracy, his creed was that there never was nor ever will be a civilized society without an aristocracy. Probably true.
And when that just goes back to what I was saying earlier about wanting to make the Senate kind of a pseudo aristocracy. They didn't want aristocracy, but yet there was a need for the advantages that aristocracies had in so you want the aristocracy without the bad part, is basically. You want the experience, you want the people that have skin in the game, you want people who have been in the system for a while, all of that, but you don't want the nobility, I'm better than everybody attitude that goes along with it. So how do you create a little bit of both? How do you get the good part of aristocracy and leave the rest behind?
Well, the whole point is the aristocrats tend to have more free time to spend reading on law, philosophy, everything.
There is that, yes.
They consider themselves wiser than the person who has to go out there and break his back for 12 hours a day to feed his family.
And I say there is that also, but in not as positive of a manner.
His endeavor was to keep it as much as possible from doing mischief.
Right.
The aristocracy, he means.
Mm-hmm.
The restriction of it has any real operation will deprive us of the services of the second branch in digesting and proposing money bills, of which it will be more capable than the first branch, because we've got money and we know how this stuff works.
Mm-hmm.
It will take away the responsibility of the second branch, the great security for good behavior. It will always leave a plea as to an obnoxious money bill that it was disliked, but could not be constitutionally amended nor safely rejected. It will be a dangerous source of disputes between the two houses. We should either take the British Constitution altogether or make one for ourselves.
Now, understand here, one of the things that's bubbling up here in this argument and the others, some of the others too, is while there's an argument over who writes the checks, they haven't really discussed, well, it has been mentioned a couple times kind of offhandedly, that it doesn't matter who writes the checks because it still has to be approved by the other side.
Yeah. The executive there has dissolved 2 houses as the only cure for such disputes. Will our executive be able to apply such a remedy? Every law, directly or indirectly, takes money out of the pockets of the people. Again, what use may be made of such a privilege in case of great emergency? Suppose an enemy at the door and money instantly and absolutely necessary for repelling them may not the popular branch avail itself of this duress to extort concessions from the Senate destructive of the Constitution itself?
What he's saying is what I just said doesn't matter because one house may pressure the other.
He illustrated this danger by the example of the Long Parliament's expeditions for subverting the House of Lords, concluding, on the whole, that the restriction would be either useless or pernicious. Well, Dr. Franklin's next, so we're definitely going to close on him. Something profound will be coming. Dr. Franklin did not mean to go into a justification of the report, but as it had been asked, what would be the use of restraining the second branch from meddling with money bills, he could not but remark that it was always of importance that the people should know who had disposed of their money and how it had been disposed of.
So he's not arguing necessarily who, but make sure it's transparent.
If it was a maxim that those who feel can best judge, this end would, he thought, be best attained if money affairs were be confined to the immediate representatives of the people.
So in other words, the best way to keep it transparent is to make sure that it's the people's representatives that are originating. And I think he is onto something here. Go ahead.
How's that worked out in 2026?
Well, but this is not through a 2026 mind. This is through their minds.
Understood. I just like to point that out because they're arguing for the right reasons. And they come to some great conclusions, and the stuff should have worked, and somehow it went wrong. And I want people to think about, why did this stuff go wrong when the idea was so right?
Yeah, and in the end, it always comes back to human nature.
This was his agreed. This was his inducement to concur in the report. As to the danger or difficulty that might arise from a negative in the second, where the people would not be proportionally represented, it might easily be got over by declaring that there should be no such negative, or if that will not do, by declaring that there shall be no such branch at all. Saying don't have a second branch if that can put a negative on the first. I think that's a pretty good place to stop with Franklin, huh?
Okay. One last thing about James Wilson. He's from Scotland originally, and so he has kind of these Scottish sensibilities. So there's one other thing to think about James Wilson too, and I've always been fascinated by this because you don't think of this existing back then. He was the avid golfer also.
Having been invented in Scotland, yes, indeed. How's your game going? You've been playing a lot of golf. Are you getting better?
Yeah, I did something very fascinating in my last game. I had more pars than ever on the course that I'm playing on, yet the worst score. So that tells you about the other holes. How bad they were.
How many balls did you lose?
I only lost one. And for the last few weeks, I haven't been losing any. So, and when you consider I used to lose on average 5 or 6 on this course when I first started playing it, that's definitely an accomplishment. I am a duffer, but I can pull off a par every once in a while. Birdies are very, very, very rare. And once in my life, I had an eagle, but I was by myself and nobody saw it. So my friend says it didn't happen.
Nope, it did not. Well, maybe if you had some flock cameras out there, you could prove it.
Yeah. Well, I nonetheless, I kept the scorecard. I kept that ball. I know I got the eagle that one time. It was a par 4, and I was able to get the ball not only on the green but right next, like 2 feet from the hole. On my basically what I did is I was like, if I really wail on it, I can get it there. But if I really wail on it, it's going to slice like crazy. So I'm going to aim way left. And I wailed on it, and it curved to the right, landed near the hole. But anyway, enough about golf. I am Douglas V. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution, douglasvgibbs.com. See it right there. Pay me a visit. I write pretty much every day, not just politics. Sometimes it's history, sometimes it's constitutional, sometimes it's something that's political. I try to write through the lens of the Constitution and my faith. I am a Christian, and we are just finally got my website. my website guy's a busy guy, and you know that more than anybody, Warhamster, because he works with them directly. But I finally got all of my books, a book page on the site as of yesterday. So for those of you who are going, hey man, how do I find your books? Go to the website, hit books. They all come up. Links to where you can get them at Amazon. It looks nice.
So I talked to him Monday. You got the website the next day. It makes me very happy to hear. So
so you pulled some strings.
Got a little bit of pull. I'll get a little bit of pull in my own company, you know.
Yeah, but every once in a while, well, you know, and I get it, you know, busy and stuff. But you know, when what my biggest money maker is my books, and my books weren't on my site, you know, well. But appreciate that. So folks, check it out. I do have a new book out. Just came out a few weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, I think it was. The Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump. I take a majority of the arguments about him being unconstitutional, and I correct that. I give you the history. I give you why he's not the unconstitutional beast that some people claim he is. I'm not necessarily saying he's perfect either, but he's not the unconstitutional beast he's made out to be by a lot of his opponents. And we're working on other stuff right now. My goal, over my time as an author, I've been putting out about a book a year. My goal is to put out 2 or 3 this year. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, you know, I'm so darn busy myself. I can't even keep up with everything Doug writes, and I really should have a Douglas V Gibbs book collection back here. But and I'm just gonna do that now that you got your site up. I'm just gonna buy the ones that I don't have. I'll eventually get around to reading them, but I got so much. Unfortunately, I research so many topics. It's impossible for me to do that because I've got more than one show. But you know, it's interesting. We're going to get here soon. They're going to start debating on the presidential powers for Article 2. They're still working on Article 1 right now in the convention. I'm going to bring up some really interesting questions. I'm going to refer it back to Trump, and basically, I'm going to start with the assumption that just about every single president we've had since maybe number 3 or 4 has been ultra outside the Constitution in way too many ways that the founding fathers never would have allowed. But we'll have those arguments when we get to Article 2.
We've had probably one since Monroe, and even Monroe had his moments outside the Constitution, but only one since Monroe. And I bet you can name the president that is as close to the Constitution as I would have liked.
Well, we did a video on it, so go ahead and tell them.
John Tyler.
Yep, John Tyler. We did a video called "Was John Tyler the most constitutional president?"
Here's something that's funny about John Tyler, real quick. So I grew up in the LA area. My teenage years was in Corona, right next to Riverside, California. And Riverside, California, if you go through Riverside along the 91, they have streets named after presidents. So, you know, you've got Madison, you got Van Buren, you know, Avenue, and then the mall is on Tyler, and so it's the Tyler Mall. I grew up with Tyler in my face, but never realized how constitutional, how much I love the guy until basically the last decade.
And the reason we say he's the best, most constitutional is he spent most of his time in presidency vetoing just about everything Congress tried to throw, saying, no, this is unconstitutional, to the point he got kicked out of his own party.
Yeah, and I love telling people that. So this guy was so firm on his stance, they threw him out of his own party, and he was good with it.
Yeah, if you guys want to go back on my channel, just look for John Tyler. Was he the most unconstitutional president in history? Doug and I had a lot of fun with that episode. It's maybe about 2 years. We're on. Let's see, what Re-Federalist is this? We're on. This is.
I'm sure you have a spreadsheet somewhere for it.
I should. I actually don't.
Between you and Alan.
This is Re-Federalist 64. That's going to be like probably episode 15. It's going to be right around there.
Okay.
I really should do a spreadsheet on it. That's a good idea. I've never figured out how I can go back and check without using Rumble's terrible search engine. And it's probably easier to find on YouTube, but there's too many war hamsters on YouTube.
Yeah. The problem with spreadsheets is you got to input all that stuff, and that takes its toll. But once it's in there, I have a spreadsheet actually for my book collection. I have over 4,000 books, and so far I've got about 1,000 of them into my spreadsheet.
I'm just going to have the AI do it straight off my Rumble page. I bet I can have that done in an hour. We'll see.
Yeah, you got agents I don't have. All right, everybody, thanks for spending the time with us. It has been a pleasure, and understand this is not just a show. This is a learning opportunity. So if you stumbled upon this and you're like, hey, that was pretty cool, go back to the beginning, catch up, watch them all. They're all worth it. This is what we're going through. This is what made me the constitutionalist I am. I thought I was a constitutionalist, and then a friend of mine says, Madison's notes. And that is what opened up everything for me. So if ever there's a few of you go, well, I wish I knew what Mr. Constitution knew, Madison's notes. And we're going through them for you. You don't even have to read them. We'll read them for you. We've discussed it for you. Go back, find the first episode. I have a whole list of the episodes on my website. I will update that soon. So if you go to the video page, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. No, it was more longer than that, about a month ago, that I put them all the links are right there. I'll do it again. I might even just try to set up a special something there for it. But definitely go back and see the previous episodes on the Madison's notes. You've got a couple of people here who have spent a lot of time in these notes. What we're giving you is not our opinion, is the founder's opinion, because we're going directly from what they wrote, what they said. And I hope you're learning from it. And definitely also do one more thing: subscribe to this channel, whichever here at Rumble. I think it's follow. I think for Rumble, but follow. Then take that, and then take the link and share it with everybody you know. Say, hey man, I came across this. This is cool. You got to check this out. Share it, because if you're not sharing it, this doesn't grow, and we don't reach as many people as we need to be reaching.
And we are growing. We just had my channel is having record numbers. Last month, last week, everything's breaking my all-time records. This is even after taking 6 months off due to injury, almost 6 months off. So I am back to pre-injury status and growing even faster. So thank you, everyone. Please continue to share it. Please continue watching. I know this is long, laborious. I could just sum up each day's stuff, but it's not the same. We wanted to hear what everybody said and why they said it. And we're going to take our time and do it right. All right, until next time. Thanks for coming, Doug. Everybody else, cheers.